Hey, everybody. Welcome to Startup Sales. I've got a great episode today. We're going to be meeting with Dan Greenberg, a two-time VP sales. We're going to talk a lot about inbound and outbound and what's better, what's not, and understanding the value of the different kinds of activities that you could be doing. It's going to be a terrific episode, so let's get to it.
Startup Sales is a podcast about what it's really like to get a business off the ground. We talk with founders, CEOs, and sales VPs from the high-tech market. You'll learn how to build and scale a sales team. You'll also hear about the growth challenges and tough decisions from others who have had both successes and failures. And now, your host of the Startup Sales Podcast, Adam Springer.
Hey, Dan, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Adam?
This is round two for all those that were watching us live, saw that we had some technical difficulties.
I'll take blame for that. That was on me.
There you go. So great, Dan. Excited to have you here. Can you give a brief introduction to who you are and what your background is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently VP of Sales and Operations at Skipify, which is a very young startup. And I'll at some point throughout our talk, I'll probably go into a little detail about what we do. But suffice to say, we are a e-commerce focused company. And prior to that, I have been in a number of sales and sales leadership roles, mostly in the digital marketing and media space, although with a little bit of SaaS in my background, at companies such as Twitter, LinkedIn, Ground Truth, which was formerly XAD, and a couple others.
Great. And so let's just jump straight into it. And we're talking about inbound and outbound today. Let's start with, what do you prefer, inbound or outbound?
So I have no preference, and I think it's but I have a really strong disposition to having no preference. And the reason I say it like that is I often come across sales cultures where there's a pretty high premium placed on outbound. For lack of a better way of putting it, it's viewed as sexier or more desirable, in the sense that if a seller can go and generate an outbound lead that's a quality lead and convert that lead and then turn it into a sale with a good lifetime value, that's seen as the ideal way to do it. And I get it. It makes some sense, because you're essentially saving on marketing costs. You're saving on the all the costs associated with bringing a lead through a pipeline and giving it to that AE. You're essentially saying, hey, account executive, please do what we're paying you to do. So I completely understand it. And I further understand it in the sense that sometimes with outbound leads, you have a better quality because you're handpicking the type of company you want to go after. So there are two reasons why it makes sense for there to be that sort of premium placed on an outbound as opposed to an inbound. However, I think one of the things that's often overlooked within certain sales organizations and within the culture of the organizations is that the amount of time and effort put in by the sales team to convert an outbound lead that didn't show some sort of desirability to work with the company is much greater. So the cost that you're saving on the marketing side, you're actually exerting on the sales side. And so when I think about outbound versus inbound, what I think about first is, what quality am I getting in inbound versus outbound in terms of lifetime value and in terms of sales cycle timing, number one. And then number two, after that, I think about the cost to get that inbound lead, but I think about it relative to this idea. And that idea is, does the inbound lead eventually, over the course of time, if you look at the whole group of inbound leads, does it turn into the same quality as the whole group of outbound leads? Now, you're going to have less outbound leads. So let's say you have 10 that convert, and you start with 10 and 2 of them convert. You might start with 100 inbound leads to get 2 of them to convert. But if those 2 are equal to the 2 that you did on the outbound side, you're actually in the same place. And oftentimes that analysis is not done all the way back to the beginning of the funnel. And you can say, hey, these 10 outbound leads are better than these 10 inbound leads. but actually it costs you just as much to get 100 inbound leads as it costs you in time and effort to get those 10 inbound leads. So I'm very specifically agnostic when it comes to inbound or outbound. What I want to look at is really see if the inbound leads that I'm starting with that are actually relatively inexpensive to get, if they're equating to those outbound leads that are harder and take a lot more time and effort from my sales team.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because, you need to, if you're going to do a heavy outbound, you need to put processes in place. You need to hire a team. You need somebody to manage that team. That takes a lot of cost and time and effort. Whereas if you just have already have a marketing funnel in place, you could just ramp that up and expedite that process.
Yeah, and the other thing I will say is it takes a toll on your account executives. We oftentimes in certain sales cultures see a burnout culture among account executives, and the constant ask to do outbound, outbound, outbound says to a salesperson in certain scenarios, we are not supporting you. Now, that may not be the case. You may absolutely be supporting that seller with other types of resources, but it tends to add to that likelihood that sellers will burn out, and therefore you'll have higher turnover.
Absolutely, especially, when you're a terrific salesperson, outbound is exhausting. And, eventually, even though we're used to rejection and we're used to hearing no, and actually we look forward to hearing no because it means we're closer to a yes, but eventually that does take its toll on us. And if I have to go through 100 no's to get through yes on inbound versus 200 no's on outbound, then it tires you out quickly. I think that's a really good perspective and good way to look at that. All right. So let's say we're an early stage startup. You don't have a marketing funnel really in place yet. Is it cheaper to build that marketing funnel, or is it cheaper to go outbound, and not just as far as costs, about time and lost opportunity?
Well, that is the question of the hour for me right now, in this moment where I sit. The new company that I'm working with, Skipify, is a very young company, and we are building right now. And we have a very exciting and interesting product that we actually have a fair amount of demand for. And I think that, in and of itself, is part of the answer to the question. So, what you have to think about is, do we have an easily relatable story that displays our market fit and is easily understandable by our market? And if so, and are we going to be able to translate that into a quick marketing message that we can put out there? And if so, if you believe that's the case, you're going to have a relatively, I say relatively because nothing is simple or easy, but a relatively easy time generating that demand early on. And if you think that it's a much harder to explain product market fit, you're probably going to want to think about going in the other direction and developing a few really, relationship models that will allow you to do some referral based and things like that, because your marketing efforts are going to ultimately be a lot more expensive relative to the amount of conversions. But the other thing that you have to really spend a lot of time thinking about, and this is the exercise that we're going through right now, is how many customers can you handle? For early stage startups, a lot of times in tech, one of the toughest things is, it's a lot easier to service 10 clients than it is to service 100 clients.
Yep.
And either from a technical integration perspective or from a relationship model and process perspective on the service side. And so if you're able to service 100 clients, if you really can, well, it's time to start thinking about getting that demand generation model in place. But if you're still not sure if you can, then you're going to want to think about, how do we maximize the revenue per client, and how do we do that by going out and getting a very few handpicked clients that make sense for us, where we can maximize revenue per client. So I think, to answer your question, there's no right answer, but the two factors are, how many clients can we handle, and how easy is it for us to generate a marketing message that will be understandable in market.
So I like that. And if you're going to hand pick, you're going to want to look for the quickest and easiest to close, but also the most profitable if you're going to go outbound.
Yeah,
And so doing that, you need to define your ICP, your ideal client profile.
absolutely.
How do you do that as an early stage?
How do you do it? So oftentimes you hear this statement. By the way, I'll start before I go on to my long diatribe. I'll start by telling you I don't know. And I think if we had the answer to that, it would be wonderful. Oftentimes you hear the statement, "You can't be everything to everyone," and that is 100% true. Uh, However, I think there is if you were to look at a timeline over the course of time, as a startup, you have a certain responsibility to your business to allow the market to define who your ideal customer is, right? And so if you're a very, very early stage startup, you have to be able to be more things to more people. And then over time, you have to really decide what your specialty is based on what the market has told you. And then as time goes on even further, you become so big, you talk about your Googles and your Facebooks and your Amazons of the world, that you start expanding into more and more things. So it starts off with being as much as you can be. Then you get really refined, and then you can start being more to more people, right? So if you're talking about the very early stage, I actually find that yes, focus is incredibly important, but you don't know what the market is going to tell you to focus on yet if you're in a very, very early stage. And so therefore, what you have to think about is setting yourself up in a situation to allow the market to give you those types of signals, right? And one of the nice things about being a very early stage company is that you're very versatile, right? And you have hand raisers, okay, who will be your early adopters, and your early adopters will send you that signal. So I think there's a danger in being too focused very, very early stage, but there's also a danger in not accepting those signals and starting to become focused. So the answer I think I'm giving is that your ideal client profile, it has to be signals from the market. You cannot go about making it completely on your own.
Interesting. I agree with you, but disagree with you at the same time. Like I
I,
agree you have to listen to the market for sure. I
yeah,
disagree with you that you have to let the market dictate that, because I feel like it's a slippery slope if you're not careful. Because what could happen is you start talking to 5 different prospects, and they're or even one prospect, and you're going to say, well, this is the one prospect that the market has brought to us so far. We're going to listen to this person, and they may not be the right people to speak to anyways, and they're going to start taking your product down a different path than you really wanted to take your product. So I think that's why I agree and disagree, because you could really go down the wrong path. What do you think?
yeah. I think you're right, and I think we're actually in more agreement than it seems on
Yeah.
the outset, because what I didn't define in my answer is the guardrails that you have to place, and you're 100% right. So what you're hitting on is the concept that's sort of a well-known understood concept in the technology world, that customers don't always know what they want, right? And so
Buyers are
you
liars.
exactly. So you have a certain vision for your product, and that vision says to you, this true north, right? And as I'm building towards true north, these are the things that are absolute musts, because without these I will never get to true north. And so if someone comes in and says you need to do this, and it goes against these absolutes in order to get you to true north, well, that's not within the vision of what your product's going to be, and that's not a market signal you're going to listen to. So you have to have the confidence to build guardrails for yourself, to say that here's the pathway I have to be on. But within that pathway, right, there's going to be a varying set of features and solutions that will satisfy different parts of the market. And within that pathway is where I'm saying I think you have to allow all those signals to play
Now we're in agreement.
out.
And I think it sounds easier said than done as we're talking about it. And so I think one of the key elements to start this process is to first define what problem it is that your potential prospects have that you want to solve, And once you start defining that, then you could go out and put those guardrails in, because then you know, like, okay, this is the problem that we want to solve. This is where we want to go. Now I want to stay within those guidelines.
Absolutely.
Okay. So with that said, now we've got, we know our ICP, we know kind of where our guidelines are, and we are going to start marketing to them, or even going out, or we're talking about outbound. We're going to select our few people. What kind of activities are there that help with this outbound?
When you say selecting our targets, I'm assuming when you're thinking about that question, you're thinking about how do we define even who we go after?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not clear.
Oh,
Lack
no.
of sleep. So we've selected our people. We've selected our target audience, who we want to go after. Let's say our 10 biggest accounts that we would like to go after at this point, at this early
Yeah.
stage, that we want as kind of probably design partners at this stage, paying design partners.
Mhm.
How do we go about reaching out to them? How do we go about, getting their attention at this stage?
So I think that any really good startup that is creating a product for a very specific market is going to have been creating that product because the founders or early stage employees who are involved in the development of the product and the understanding of the market come from places within that market. So I think, look, I think if you're in a startup where your first 10 or 20 um, customers or partners are completely unknown to you, there's a and you don't have any relationships or referral capabilities, then you have to ask yourself the question, do I know enough about this market that I'm inventing a product to solve a problem, right? And if the answer to that is, well, I really do, because I know the market even though I don't know the people, then I think that tells you what your next set of hires has to be. And so I think the answer that I'm telling you is, when you're talking about your first 10 or 20 targets, you have to start from relationships, because you're going to have a real tough task when it comes to building a process for demand gen and building a process for a marketing to sales funnel that is more at scale. And that's a challenge that you're going to have to conquer as soon as you get those first design partners or beta partners or whatever you want to call them in the door, and you've done some of the first integrations and so on and so forth. And you're going to have a really tough challenge building a process that takes you from marketing to sales. But that process cannot start with the first 10 or 20 targeted buyers or partners, because there's just not enough scale to make that process work. So it has to be referral based. It has to be relationship based. It can be LinkedIn reach out based if you know the right person, but you haven't talked to them in a while. It can be a little bit of a sort of cold outreach via email or a phone call if you haven't talked to the right person in quite a while. But if you can't identify those people and you don't know who you're going after on those first 10 to 20, you have a problem that's more fundamental, and you need to think about addressing it in hiring, because you cannot develop a process for 10 to 20 targets. You develop a process for 100 or 1,000 targets down the road. Does that make sense?
That it makes sense. And I understand what you're saying. I still disagree with you.
That's fair. We're disagreeing on a lot. I like. Well, last
There we
time
go.
we disagreed, it turns out we agreed. So let's see if
No
that's the
fun.
case
Correct.
here.
So this is our first disagreement.
Yeah, yeah, right.
And let's open this up for discussion then, because I
Yeah.
don't believe that you should hire somebody with a Rolodex, kind of, because you're not really testing the market, because then you're actually saying, okay, these people know me, like me, and trust me already. How am I supposed to get this repeatable? How am I supposed to, know that this actually works? Because these people already know me, and it's not a real market when you're going after people you've already worked with in the past.
Mhm. So you're 100% right, and so you're getting to the idea of what's good revenue versus what's not as good revenue, right? Can
Okay.
I repeat this? Can I scale this? No, and that's the right place to go, because I think that's where this conversation took us.
Yeah.
If I can get 10 great clients in, but it's all because I knew them, that's not repeatable down the road, and I'm not going to be able to scale. But let's go even one step further back and get more fundamental here. If I can't even test my product, test my integrations with my partners, test the literally the can I use this product as a client who's in this industry? If I can't even do that with people that I know, and I can't address that by getting referrals to those people, then I'm not tight enough in the industry to be able to even get to step one, so that I can get to step two, which is that scalability. So where you're 100% right, in my opinion, that you need to start to develop a process to understand if you have scalability and repeatability and so on and so forth. There is a step before that. And if you don't address that step, you're going to find yourself not being able to even move to step two. So while I agree with you, I would never hire for a Rolodex in general terms as a company grows. Hiring for a Rolodex very, very early on in that first, sort of, can we test this product in market? Can we get feedback from customers? Becomes important, because without step one, you can't get to step two.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm with you. So you're saying it's more like they're beta testers, and also testing that your knowledge and experience in the industry, but also like beta testers. Hey, does this work? Is this are we on the right path, and getting feedback from them, rather than even though they're going to be paying clients, or hopefully they're going to be paying clients, but they're going to be more that those early adopters to
Yeah.
to prove the market for you.
Yeah. And I'll echo what you said further, though. Process is the most important thing. Process is king, as opposed to relationships and Rolodex, because so as soon as you move past that initial stage, that initial design partner beta testing phase, then your entire focus has to be on, can we build something that allows us scalability? And then what you said about not hiring for a Rolodex becomes 100% true. So I want to echo that, because that's a really important point that I think should not be overlooked. But we were just talking about two slightly different stages in the development of a product.
Gotcha. So again, we're in agreement.
There you go.
There we go. Cool. You said something interesting. Good revenue and not so good revenue. Can
Mhm.
you dive into depth on that?
Yeah. So good revenue has, let's call it, four components. I'm going to remember all four, and I've gone through this exercise a few times. Okay, so the first thing is it has scalability, right? Um, and that's exactly what we just talked about, right? Do I have a process that allowed me to bring that revenue in, or do I have a guy who knew a woman who knew someone, and something like that just happened coincidentally, right? So the first thing is scalability. Have I developed a structure that allows me to do what I just did over and over again, right? The second property that good revenue has is predictability, right? Because and it goes back to the process. Does this process work well enough that I know that I did all of this in 1 month? And if I do it in the next month, there's a really good likelihood I'm going to be close to the same revenue level that I was in the last month when I did it, right? The third thing that it has is resource efficiency, right? And what I mean by resource efficiency is, does it cost me an incredible amount of money to drive that revenue? So good, good revenue doesn't cost me an incredible amount to drive it. And obviously that's very, very different for every business. And startups fall into the trap oftentimes where they say, if I can drive the revenue, I can worry about costs later. And to a certain extent, that is true, right?
Especially when you're
Most
getting
startups.
VC money.
Well, yeah, exactly. And most startups do lose money early on, and that's okay. But you can't be losing money from a process perspective, from a demand gen and sales process perspective. In other words, you need to be developing a model that says that, the cost that I put into each individual sale is less than the actual sales are bringing in. You can have other costs that are problematic, and those you can deal with at a later time. But at least from the perspective of the sales process, you need to put yourself in a position where the math is working. And so, so that resource efficiency is, and then the last thing is, so it's a little different than resource efficiency, right? It's more about, it's more, I would call it relationship efficiency, right? Am I having to do so much for the client? Am I needing to have my people spend so much time that it's not duplicatable, right? So I differentiate resource efficiency, which is a lot about money and time and effort, from relationship efficiency, where I'm deciding, is the service that I'm providing to clients scalable, or am I doing so much that I could never actually make that work at the scale that I need to grow the business, right? So again, so good revenue means that I have a model in place in terms of devoting those people resources to servicing the client, that says that I can grow revenue at a rate that's higher than the amount that I need to spend to keep adding people to keep providing those services.
I like that. Scalability, predictability, and efficiency, both on resources and in relationship.
Yeah.
Love it. Dan, I think that's really great advice and really good things to follow, especially to make sure that your every client that comes in, you got to make sure that, hey, is this good revenue? You should follow that checklist. As we come to a close here, what would be your biggest advice to new startups as far as getting new clients?
I think biggest advice is tough, because it really depends very, very much on the stage at which the startup's in, and it depends very, very much on the problems that the specific startup is encountering. One thing I will say that I think is often really, really overlooked, and I think this will speak to certain startups and it won't speak to other startups, and it just, it is what it is, because it has a lot to do with the question that's being asked and the problem that's being confronted. Involve your sales team in your marketing efforts, and involve your marketing team in your sales efforts as you develop a process and continue with that down the road. And what I mean by that really specifically is that so often as startups develop, what we find is this sort of headbutting between, is this a good lead? Oh, it was a good lead, you just didn't convert it. Oh, well, it wasn't a good lead, that's why I didn't spend time on it, right? And the bigger problem that comes from that, beyond just discord between your sales and marketing team, is actually it puts you in a really, really difficult position in terms of the ability to understand data and what it's telling you about the quality that your demand gen process is driving for your sales team, right? Because if the sales team is sitting here saying, we're not going to work this lead because it's not a good lead, and the marketing team is saying it is a good lead, how do you count that? And how do you set up resource allocation in order to combat that? Because you don't know, is it good or is it bad, right?
Yeah.
And so what I mean really specifically is, your sales team spends time on the phone conveying messaging to clients. That is no different from the messaging developed by your marketing team. So allow your sales team to develop content for your marketing team. Allow them to write don't allow them, set up processes for them to contribute by creating blogs, by creating web explainers and videos and things like that. And those get sent to marketing, and marketing then takes those and turns those into marketing collateral, right? And allow your sales team to set up rating systems for leads, right? But make sure that they understand that the rating systems that they set up for leads are being used to improve the leads that they are getting, and have them directly interact with the marketing team so that the marketing team understands why certain leads are evaluated as good and why certain leads are not evaluated as good, right? And on the other side, have your marketing team take the materials that they have created and sit in on calls and go to sales meetings and be a part of presentations so that they see how that material is used and conveyed in the real world, so that they have an understanding about how those things are going. I think it's really, really important, like I said, to involve the marketing team in the sales process, involve the sales team in the sales process, because you end up with a much more cohesive unit, even if they are two completely fundamental different teams. And the most important thing about it is it makes the data that you receive and the understanding of how to act on that data much, much better.
I think for the third time, I have to butt heads with you and disagree, because I think that was terrific advice. But at the beginning, you said that it's not for all companies. And I think that's for all companies at any stage.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's the best kind of disagreement, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think no matter what stage you're at, even if you're a big company with 300-400 people or more, you definitely need to have that collaboration between sales and marketing. I think that's such an important piece, and I love the advice that you give for the salespeople to be, create the blogs. Maybe they create only the skeleton of the blog and the idea, the concept, and then marketing could put the nice words together. But I agree, and I think that is a really good piece of advice. Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
Cool. How could people reach out to you and find more about you?
So I think I don't know if you flashed it or there it is. I see it now. So that's my email address. That's my personal email address. Absolutely. Anyone who's watching this can feel free to shoot me a note. I'm happy to engage and have a conversation if there's specific things that you want to have a conversation about.
For those that aren't watching, it's Dan Greenberg 4, and that's the number 4 at gmail.com. And also, you're on LinkedIn?
Yes, I am. And I believe it's Dan Greenberg 4 is the end of my vanity LinkedIn URL. But I'm not that hard to find. VP of Sales and Ops at Skipify.
Great. Dan, really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Adam. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Startup Sales with Adam Springer. Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Contact Adam about speaking engagements or consulting services at adam@startupsales.io.